Okay, good morning everybody.
Good morning.
We have just a little bit of time to cover a very important piece that we actually read, if you remember, if you were here on Good Friday. So we will be in Isaiah 53. Technically we will start with verse 13 of chapter 52. It's one block. Okay, so I will even write it down. Or write it up, however, you know. That's one of the so-called songs of the servant. So technically, scholars determined four of them. It is chapter 42. So 42, 1 through 9. Then second one is 49. 1 through 13. The third one is 50, I believe, yes, 54 to 11. And the fourth one is 52, verse 13 to 53, to the end of the chapters, to the end of the chapter. Yet, there is an important thing, and all of them have phrases like, "Here is my servant," or "the Spirit of the Lord came upon my servant," and so on and so forth. So there are four of them. But there is one more important passage that I believe we need to consider and put it all together as one block. So the five, oops, it's supposed to be 5, not 6. It's 61, 1 through 3 or 4, but 3 would suffice. The reason is, if we go through this paradigm, if we go through these four, we will see kind of like a call, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon the servant. Then things that he's supposed to do to bring Jacob back, Israel should return to God. And then you have kind of like a third one where it's very interesting, very deep relationship in the midst of the suffering I, as a word of the servant, and the Lord. So how they combine together. And then one of the probably most famous passage, that's the reason why we read it, is 53 basically. I mean 52 verse 13 to the end of chapter 53. The thing is, we know that it ends up somewhat gloriously because he is vindicated, he is in the tune with mighty people, with noble people, and he will bring to righteousness other ones, but it still ends up with his death. The thing is, that's why I believe it is important to end up with 61, where he is again, one more time it is noticed that the Spirit of the Lord upon me, and Lord sent me to proclaim. To proclaim what? And that's the words that Jesus used while he was preaching in one of the Galilean synagogues. If you go into Luke chapter 4, that's the passage that he opens. Okay? So the freedom to the prisoners, the healing to the sick, and so on and so forth. So that's the end. So that's, in a sense, we can compare it with the baptism of Jesus, where the Spirit descended upon him. Okay? Then we have kind of passage about his ministry. His ministry was about to bring Israel back to God, because at the time of Jesus there was a temple, but there was lots and lots of ways how they broke the law and broke the relationship with God. And even those who would try to would maintain the relationship with God in their own way, not in the way that God wants them to maintain. You know, it's kind of cool, you know, can I help you? Yes, you can help me have an impact, you know, and put the screw in the wall. You know, instead of that person takes the broom and starts to sweep the floor. I didn't need that. I need this one. You know, I need you to put the screw in the wall. So that's kind of stuff we have in some religious parties like Sadducees, who maintain the temple on one side, but then they came up with some interesting ideas that turn people away from the Lord. Or Pharisees, who on one hand really developed life outside of Jerusalem. So if you want to be a godly Jew, if you want to live according to the Bible outside of Jerusalem, if you cannot go to regular temple worship, how do you live your life? And they developed a great system. It was wonderful. It was very missionary type approach. As I think I already mentioned it a few times, when Jesus said they go across the sea to convert one of them to be like them. Okay, to go across the sea, he did not mean, most likely, okay, let's put it kind of like, most likely he did not mean Galilean Sea, but most likely he meant is Mediterranean Sea. And that's why we see Paul writing in one of his letters, one of his late letters, that I am planning to go where? To Spain. Knowing his strategy that he would always come to big city where synagogue already exists, somebody had to preach them about God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So most likely it was Pharisees. But with all of this good stuff, I like Pharisees, but they were hypocrites. And that's the main problem. I mean, that's why Jesus says, do what they tell you to do, but do not act like they act. Because even them did not really follow what they themselves came up with. So their theological, or actually, I would scratch it, their application of theological ideas were great. Awesome. The thing is, they didn't follow them. They didn't follow through. Okay, so that's the ministry. And then by chapter 50, we end up kind of like in Gethsemane. It is, if you read it carefully, it is very, very close to what Jesus says, not even what he says, but how he talks to his Father in Gethsemane when hour is near. So it's I and the Lord and what he's supposed to do and how everything should develop and so on and so forth. Then, by fourth song of the sermon, we end up where? At Calvary. Okay, at Golgotha. Okay, we end up on the cross because basically that's the description of the cross and then the tomb. He was, naked. He was not really great that we would look with an awe, and cross is not really cool stuff, not in the sense of we do not need to, that it's great for us. That's why we have symbols of the cross everywhere. But let's put it this way, the crucifixion, how it was done in Roman Empire, it was a very ugly stuff. It was really bad. But we know that he not only died, if he would only die, that's, one more sacrificial death, but it would not trigger new creation. Okay, he had to be raised. So with resurrection, he comes to a new phase of glory. Sorry, that's why we need a passage in chapter 61. Okay, and that's very interesting. I have some, what's that phrase? I know, pet peeves. One of them is I like structural analysis of the text, and that's very interesting. If we will open 42, it goes as, give me a second. Behold my servant whom I uphold, my chosen in whom my soul delights. I put my spirit upon him. Okay, that's the beginning. If we'll jump to 61, if you're welcome to use the Bibles, but we're going to jump from place to place a lot. 61 starts, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. Okay, so we have I don't know, can you see it or not? Spirit of the Lord. Lord, and this is Spirit of the Lord. Okay? And then the second one, he brings Jacob back and Israel in 49. And what he does in 52, end of 52, 53 is basically the main idea is because of him, many people will come back to righteousness. Okay, to what in Hebrew is tzedakah. It's not necessarily a sinless life. The point of being righteous in the Bible is it's a person who maintains on a regular basis his relationship with the Lord. Okay? How you can be righteous under new covenant instructions, let's put it this way, includes also a sacrifices. Sacrifices for sin included. Okay? So if you sin, it doesn't mean that you are not righteous anymore. You will not be righteous if you will not bring a sacrifice. Okay? That's the problem. Okay? That we need to understand it. That every sin does not break your righteousness. What breaks your righteousness is if you cut off relationship with the Lord. Okay? So if you sin, it's like, oh no, I'm not righteous. And, then you do a sacrifice and you do one step out of the temple area, you sin again, okay, you are not righteous anymore. Okay? That's not a thing. The thing is, we need to maintain righteousness. They needed to maintain righteousness on a regular basis because of sacrificial system. We do it differently though. That's why every time when we come to church, we start with calling upon the name of the Lord. And as soon as we end up in the Lord's presence, because when we call upon the name of the Lord, it's like, I can call, my wife, and she probably will somehow react. So we say, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hopefully, he somehow reacts. Okay, so we end up in His presence. What do we do as soon as we end up in His presence? We confess our sins. Okay? Does not mean that we run away from Him. It's actually vice versa. When we come into His presence, we need to maintain this relationship properly. So He brings back people to righteousness. Or back to righteousness. And in the middle, it's this, as I said, I and the Lord. Okay? So, A prime, B prime, and C. So we have this so-called chiastic structure. It's very interesting. When your ends feed each other, then the middle, then the closer to the middle, and then the middle one. Just very interesting observation. And as you notice, all of these passages are in the block which modern scholarship calls Deutero and so second and third part of Isaiah. Okay, I have to spend some time with that just to warn you, because again, depending of what kind of commentary you will pick up, they will start to talk about that. Even if you read our Concordia Publishing have this wonderful blue cover classic commentary. Even it's like they have 3 volumes for Isaiah. Okay, that's kind of big book, but it's not I would say proportionally it's not the biggest commentary. I think the commentary on Obadiah, if anybody knows it, Obadiah has only 1 chapter. It's about this fat. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So they have 3 volumes on Isaiah, and volumes go with that thing, chapters 1 through 39, then 40 to I believe 55, and then 56 to 66. So 2 words, a little bit more than 2 words. I mean, I can put it into words, what is that? But it's not politically correct, it's not good for recording. But seriously speaking, the first one is B, but then guess what's the second one? Okay, so seriously speaking, after by the end of 18th century, one character came up with idea that the book of Isaiah as we know it was not written by one guy. It was at least two guys, and the first part is 1 through 39, and the 40 to 66 is another part. It is written by another guy who wrote it like 150, about 200 years later. The reason why the name of the scholar, last name of the scholar, is Doom. Okay, so the guy is doomed actually with his theology, seriously. So he came up with that idea. The reason is, in 44, and we will mention that, in 44, in the end of 44 and in the beginning of 45, we read about the guy named Cyrus. Okay, the Cyrus is a Persian king. Okay, that's the guy who lived after Babylon. Okay, to mess up your brain totally with dates, I have to tell you that Isaiah actually lived 720, 586, so about 150 years before Babylonian captivity started. Okay, so if it was him, he had to have some kind of access to a provision of God, and in his prophetic wisdom, he wrote the name of Cyrus. But since this Doom guy did not believe in the prophecy that all the names are written after the fact, he realized that it could not be same Isaiah. Okay, he just simply did not believe in the prophecy. Later on, so it was in 1789, so about 60 years later, we have another character who said, no. This part from 40 to 66 could not be written by one guy either. It should be it should be another guy. So right now in the modern scholarship, we have three Isaiahs who lived in different time, in maybe even a different country. So this is kind of Israeli Isaiah, this is a Babylonian Isaiah, this one, and this is either Persian or post-Babylonian exile Isaiah. Okay? I mean, we can laugh about that, but unfortunately even if you go to not far away from here to Westman, I'm not even saying about UCSB, that's not even a question. But if you go to Westman, most likely that's what you will hear in the Bible class. So if you have your kids and if you want them to get a decent Christian education, think what they're gonna teach them in Christian colleges. That's what they teach them. Okay? Same as there was no Moses and whatever stuff. Okay? What do we say about that? We say that this is incorrect. Let's put it in politically correct terminology. One simple thing I can show you is there is a great old but great book of The Unity of Isaiah by Oswald Ellis. Looks like this. If you really want to read it, it's full of very good explanations, and just passage after passage he explains why is that. So that's the thing. The reason why I have to waste time about that, two reasons. One of them is, as I said, you might Google some commentary on Isaiah and you will end up hearing about Deutero-Isaiah or Trade-Isaiah or things like that. Okay, so just be aware it exists. You don't have to believe it. Let's put it this way. My faith is not strong enough to believe in that. Okay? You have to really stretch your faith, even though they try to come up with some kind of positive explanations. Second thing, again, as I said, as we notice, 42, 49, 50, 52, 61. All of this is in the second part. The reason is, we will talk about that. In the first part, especially in chapter 14, we have a character who is a prime adversary or prime challenge for God's plan. And after having, if I will say word insertion, but okay, Book of Isaiah, basically, you can structurize it a different way, but three main parts. You have chapters 1 to 35, that's prophecies. Then there is a historical story. I know it doesn't sound right, but historical story is about King Hezekiah. Okay? No prophecies, just the life of King Hezekiah. Very short period when the Assyrians came, and then when they attacked Jerusalem, how he acts. He basically almost dies, prays, and that's why he is resurrected. Okay? And he comes to glory, and people from Babylon come and visit him, and he shows his glory. Which was not a smart idea to do, but that's a different story, okay? We are not going to talk about that. But what I mean is, in the middle, you have a historical passage that basically shows the paradigm for the whole book, okay? In the beginning, you have a guy from King of Babylon, actually, described in such a way, we'll come to that, he is not really a good character. Then you have a good example of the king. Then you have songs of the servant who goes basically through the same paradigm. He is called, he does his ministry, he goes through very difficult, like a low point problems up to death, and then he is risen to glory. Okay? That's why these songs are in the second part. Okay? Now, as I said, in chapter 14, let's jump there for a second, and let us read a few verses. So, Isaiah, we are still in Isaiah. In chapter 14, we have a guy. Okay. 3, verse 3. Chapter 14, verse 3. When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. Okay, we have a guy who is king of Babylon. He is not named because it's not the particular person. That's what Babylonians will do to Israel. Okay? How the oppressor has seized, the insolent fury seized. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of ruler. He struck the people with wrath, with unceasing bow, and he ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. The reason they break forth into singing, because this oppressor, the king of Babylon, is crushed. Okay, he end up in Sheol. Okay, which is not a good place to be. Okay, so he talks to him. Verse 10. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. The sound of your harps, maggots are laid at the bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. Okay, so it's not a great place to be, definitely. The thing is, so that's the main adversary. And you have two people in book of Isaiah who resist this guy. The one of them is a servant, and his ministry starts in chapter 42. Okay? I know we talk about the whole thing, but to understand what's going on in chapter 53, we kind of need to take it as a whole. So, sorry. So with the whole story about servant, but there is another guy. While I am raising the board, you can go to chapter 44 and 45. And that's where so this is servant. There is another one, or actually he is not a king. Here, in this passage, in 44 and 45, he is not a king. He is a shepherd. But as we talked last time, for those of you who were here during the worship service, you kind of elevated from shepherds to a king position. That's kind of a good background job description if you want to apply for a king position. You know, it's better if you have in your resume. You used to be a shepherd for X number of years. Okay, so who do we have in the end of chapter 44 and the beginning of chapter 45? In the end of chapter 44 and the beginning of chapter 45, we do have very interesting thing. Okay, let us start with verse 24 in chapter 44. Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? And then we end up with last verse in this chapter. Who, that's the same Lord, who says of, right now he says of Cyrus. He is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my purpose. Okay, saying to Jerusalem, she shall be built, and the temple, your foundation shall be laid. Let's jump into the next few verses. As you know, I don't have to tell you, but I will just remind you, there were no chapter breaks and no verses breaks in the good old scrolls. Okay, so we just keep going. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. Okay? So, first of all, one simple comment. Who knows how it sounds in Greek, the word anointed? We use it very often. It's the word Christ. Okay? So Cyrus was Messiah. He was a Christ, not with a capital C. He was one of the anointed ministers that God used to deliver his plan. Okay? So, plus two things. Now let us jump into the very beginning of book of Ezra, the chapter 1 and verse 1. So, you remember what Cyrus should do. He will tell to Jerusalem that Jerusalem will be built and the foundations of the temple would be laid. Okay? Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. So, what did he proclaim? Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, so he uses the personal name of Yahweh basically, God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may his God be with him, and let them go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Okay? That's task number 1. To come to this task, he had to break down Babylonian Empire. We are not going to go into many details, but if you read book of Daniel, chapter 5, you read the story that we usually know as a Belshazzar's feast. Okay? That's the last king of Babylon, Belshazzar. He was not actually even a king. He was from a kingly family, but his dad kind of retired. He went to isolated place, become kind of quasi-monk, got into meditation and stuff like that. Started smoking pot, no woman, no cry, relaxed, really, really heavily, get loose, whatever they, kind of Mayu, thing like that. Seriously. So it is interesting. If you read Daniel chapter 5, he promises whoever will solve the riddle of the writing on the wall will be third person in the kingdom. Why he cannot offer second person in the kingdom? Because he's the second person in the kingdom. Okay, he's the son of king who is not really the king. Okay, so then Daniel shows up and actually doesn't really want to help him because he was a jerk. But that's a different story. So the thing is that Belshazzar is in Babylon and he's surrounded all over the capital because everything else was already defeated with the army of Cyrus. And he goes in, and literally, if we read it carefully, Isaiah 45, the God makes this Cyrus subdue nations before him and loose the belts of kings. Okay? It's not necessarily belts as belts, but if you walk in the good old days, or especially if you want like a run, you put your garments around here and make a kind of like a knot here. The thing is, sorry, ladies, but I would not use the really serious words, but if you need to go to the bathroom, you need to unloosen that and you need to go do your stuff. The thing is, that's what it shows. The Cyrus would be so scary that people will be, be scared. Let's put it this way, very scared. So, and if you read Daniel chapter 5, no kidding, it's in the text. The belts of Belshazzar were loosened. I mean, he kind of dishonored himself in front of all the people. Seriously. So that's the Cyrus. The thing is, who is going to be a real guy who will defeat the adversary? Is it going to be a servant or is it going to be a shepherd? Okay? We need the shepherd to enter into the city to get rid of the guy, but really, if we read very carefully, we have very many things that show that here is the king of Babylon, his description, and the way he is described or the way he is pictured, especially in chapter 52, 53, show that that's the guy who will not only defeat him but replace him. Let me show you at least 4 things and then I will almost end and I will explain why. Why is that? Okay, first of all, let's write it on the board. So we have, sure, yes. So we have King of Babylon. Yeah. And we have servant. So, you might want to put 2 fingers, like in 14 and in 53, because we'll go back and forth. In chapter 14, let us see how their lives are described. If we'll go to 14:6, 6 and 14. No. Okay, you have to trust me. 2, 4, and 12. Let's see what kind of words are used in 14. So, first of all, in 14:6, it says that the one who struck the people in wrath, okay? And then he was the one who struck, he was the one who oppressed them. He was the one, verse 2, oppressed. Verse 4, how oppressor, he is called oppressor. In verse 12, he is again, in verse 12, sorry. The guy who laid the nations, okay? So the one who is oppressor. So if we will go to 53, on the other hand, in verses 4 and 5, 53, 4 and 5, surely he was born out of grief, the guy who carried our sorrows, and yet we esteem him stricken and smitten by God and afflicted. Okay, so this one, that's the one who afflicted, that's the guy who smote the people, that's the guy who slew the people and oppressed the people. That's the guy, okay, hopefully it's kind of almost right, but 54, I'm sorry, 53, 4 and 5. Okay? Last chance. So 14. Yay, it works. Okay. There is another story. How he what's the response of kings, other kings? Okay? If we go to chapter 14, kings are surprised that king of Babylon, that he's finally humiliated, and they are rejoicing about that. 14, 9 to 11 and 16. Okay? Let us go there. So, Sheol beneath is stripped up to meet you when you come. It ruses, shades you, greet you, all who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thorns all who were kings of the nations. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. Okay, and so on and so forth. So they see him being, brought down, and that's really, in a sense, good for them. Not necessarily the kings, but let's go into 52. On the other hand, 52, 14, 15. Fourteen, 15. So what do we have here about the servant? As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of children of mankind. So shall be sprinkled many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which has not been told to them that they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. So they are, even though they are surprised again as his humiliation, as how he looks like, but yet they shout with joy. Okay? So that's going up. What about his death? So let's compare deaths of these people. Oops. Death. Okay? In 14, 18 to 20, he dies. I mean, the king of Babylon simply dies. 18 to 20. All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out away from your grave like a loth branch clothed with a slain, those pierced by the sword who go down to the stones in the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. Okay? So he's not simply died. He died he is not even buried in an honorable way. Okay? 53. Okay, if we jump into 53, sorry, wrong color. In 53 there is a famous passage, and we know how it was fulfilled in the story of Jesus, verses 10 and 12. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He was put into grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with many. Actually, not with many. The real translation is with the great people. Okay, with the mighty people. And he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul in death. He was numbered with transgressors, yet he bore the sins of many. He makes intercessions for transgressions. Okay, so even in his burial, and we know, if we read very careful account of Jesus' story, the guy Arimatheus, the from Arimathea, yeah, he came and he offered his burial place. It was a tomb near Jerusalem, probably cost lots of bucks at those days. So one more important thing, and we will almost come to an end. It is interesting to see how there is a reverse in their fortune. Reverse in their fortune. Okay? What I mean is, the king of Babylon starts great. Okay, let's go to chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. Okay, 13, 14. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God, and I will, okay, so that's how he started, with his kind of glorious intentions. I will set my throne on high, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like a most high. Okay? Yet, as we know, go a little bit further, verse 15, but you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Okay, so he started gloriously, he ended up low. What do we have in chapter 53? Let us go to 52:13. For the beginning, behold, my servant shall act wisely, prosper, whatever. He shall be high and lifted up, and he shall be exalted. But the thing is, to come to this exaltation, he goes through what's described in chapter 53. Okay? He goes through shame, he goes through torture, he goes through death, he goes into burial, yet at the very end he will be exalted. Okay? So both of these guys, if this one goes down from up high, this one goes from being at the lowest state into glory. Okay? Now the question is, why do we need two guys? Why do we need shepherd on one hand, who is a strong ruler at Cyrus, who will dismiss the end of the Babylonian captivity on one hand, and yet we need a servant on the other hand? I believe it's two main paradigms. So sometimes you rule with the law and sometimes you show the example of mercy. But in Jesus, it's very interesting. We have both together. Let us jump for 1 second into Gospel of Mark chapter 10. In Gospel of Mark chapter 10, toward the end of the chapter, we have a discussion, actually, about authority. Two guys came to Jesus and said, would you mind when we know you will be a king? One day you will be a king. So those guys were smart enough. They kind of knew that he will be elected. So they negotiated it beforehand, can we be a minister of finances and this guy will be a minister of defense? So we will cut the budget with the way we want it, this kind of stuff. I mean, seriously, that's the real guys. If they think this is the king, you need to think what kind of suitcase with what kind of label you will have afterwards. And it's not only a spiritual thing. They were talking about real Israel, So, the way he answered. 42, sorry. You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be the great among you must be a servant. And whoever might be the first among you might be a slave to all. For, now there is a reason. Okay? Verse 45. For even Son of Man. Okay, Son of Man is actually a title that kind of like a descendant of Adam, who is a CEO of creation. So even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So, therefore, on one hand, Jesus entered into Jerusalem like a king. Okay, and we kind of try to replay that with our branches. Remember, we had our branches sing the song, and that kind of, it's glorious and very interesting. So he enters as a king, yet peaceful king, yet he doesn't stay at the king position. He makes himself a servant. He goes through Gethsemane. He goes through Calvary. That's why he ended up with resurrection and glory. And, as we confess, he sits at the right hand of the Father and basically runs the world. Okay? So, that's the lesson for today. Stay blessed.